In the autumn of 1347, people in Europe went to bed thinking about their harvests, their debts, and their children. By sunrise, they were bleeding from the inside. It started with a cough, then a fever that felt like a furnace. By noon, dark, grapefruit-sized swellings, black and oozing, erupted under their arms. By the next morning, they were cold. No doctors could stop it. No prayers could slow it. In just 5 years, this invisible killer would erase 50 million people from the map. That's half of Europe gone. Imagine half of everyone you know, your neighbors, your family, your coworkers, simply vanishing. This wasn't just a disease. It was the collapse of an entire reality. Today, we go inside the darkness. This is the story of the Black Death, the moment humanity almost ended, and the terrifying way it paved the road to the modern world. Before the nightmare, there was a golden age. We often think of the Middle Ages as a muddy, miserable time. We're wrong. By the year 1300, Europe was booming. The weather was unusually warm. Crops were overflowing. Because there was food, there were babies. The population had doubled in 2 centuries. Cities like Paris and Venice were hives, packed, wealthy, and more connected than ever before. But there was a hidden danger in this success. Power thrives on connection. The Mongol Empire had stabilized the Silk Road, creating a medieval worldwide web. Spices from India and silks from China flowed into Europe with incredible speed. But nature doesn't just move goods. It moves biology. Europe was a tinderbox of crowded, unsanitary cities, and the Silk Road was the fuse. Have you ever wondered if our own global world is just as fragile? The killer wasn't born in Europe. It was waiting in the dirt of Central Asia. Meet Yersinia Pestis. It's a bacterium of ruthless, mechanical efficiency. For thousands of years, it lived quietly in the blood of marmots and ground squirrels. But in the 1330s, the climate shifted. Great droughts followed by freak floods drove the rodents out of their burrows. They moved toward human settlements looking for food. With them came the real assassins, fleas. When a flea bites an infected rodent, the bacteria multiply so fast they literally block the flea's stomach. The flea becomes ravenous. It bites anything, including humans, and vomits the bacteria directly into the wound. The first victims in the East didn't know they were the patient zeros of an apocalypse. By 1340, rumors reached the West, tales of rains of fire in India, reports of China being buried under mountains of corpses. The Europeans listened, but they didn't worry. To them, these were pagan lands. They believed God was simply punishing the East. They didn't realize the executioner was already on a boat, heading for their front door. 1346, the Crimean Peninsula. The city of Kaffa was a fortress of gold. Owned by the Genoese, it was the gateway between the East and the Mediterranean. But outside the walls, the Mongol army, the Golden Horde, was screaming for blood. The siege lasted for months. Then something strange happened. The Mongols stopped attacking. Inside the city, the Genoese looked over the walls and saw a horror they couldn't explain. The Mongol soldiers were dropping dead by the thousands. Not from arrows, but from a mysterious fire in their blood. The Khan, Johnny Beg, knew he was losing, but he decided if he couldn't have Kaffa, no one would. He gave a horrific order. He loaded the plague-infested corpses of his own soldiers into trebuchets. He launched them over the city walls, bodies smashed into the market squares. The air turned foul. The Genoese tried to dump the bodies into the sea, but it was too late. The bacteria had found its new home. Terrified, a few Genoese ships slipped out of the harbor at night. They were fleeing for home Italy. They thought they were escaping. In reality, they were the delivery drivers for the end of the world. October 1347, Messina, Sicily. 12 galleys appear on the horizon. The dock workers go out to meet them, expecting silk and pepper. Instead, they find a ghost ship. Most of the sailors are dead. The few who are alive are unrecognizable, covered in black boils, coughing up dark blood, pleading for water that they can't swallow. The Sicilians realize the danger instantly. They chase the ships out of the harbor with fire and arrows. But it didn't matter. The ships had stayed long enough for the rats to run down the mooring ropes. From Messina, the infection exploded. It hit Genoa. It hit Venice, the richest city in the world. Venice tried to fight back. They invented the quarantine from the Italian quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. They forced ships to wait on isolated islands. It was the first time in history a government tried to use science to stop a shadow. But how do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you stop a killer when your doctors believe the disease is caused by bad smells or the alignment of the planets? By the time the sun set on 1347, the Italian peninsula was screaming, and the rest of Europe was next. What happens to a society when its leaders have no answers? We're about to find out. By 1348, the plague wasn't just a story from the docks. It was in the bread. It was in the water. It was in the air. It hit Florence first. This was the New York City of the Middle Ages, the center of art, banking, and power. In less than 6 months, 60% of the population was dead. The great writer Giovanni Boccaccio watched it happen. He wrote that the terror was so deep, it dissolved the hearts of men. Fathers looked at their sick sons and ran the other way. Mothers abandoned their babies in their cribs, terrified that a single breath would seal their own fate. The most sacred bond of humanity, the family snapped like a dry twig. In Paris, the death toll reached 800 people a day. The graveyards overflowed so quickly that bodies were left in the streets. The smell was so thick you could taste it. The church, the only source of hope for these people, began to crumble. Priests, who were expected to give the last rites to the dying, were the ones dying fastest. When the people saw that the holy men were just as vulnerable as the sinners, they started asking a dangerous question. If God isn't saving the priests, who is left to save us? The brightest minds of the 1300s were at the University of Paris. The King of France asked them, "Why is this happening?" Their answer? The stars. They claimed that on March 20th, 1345, at 1 p.m., 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars aligned in the sign of Aquarius. They believed this created a corrupt vapor that poisoned the air. Today, we call that miasma theory. Back then, it was the best science they had. But their cures were more dangerous than the disease. They told people not to bathe, fearing that hot water would open the pores to the poison air. They told people to carry flowers to mask the scent of death. They even suggested drinking crushed emeralds or liquid gold. But most of all, they used bloodletting. They would cut the patient's arm and let the bad blood drain out into a bowl. Of course, this only weakened the immune system and helped the bacteria spread faster. Imagine being a doctor in 1348. You are surrounded by a sea of dying people, and every single thing you try makes it worse. The experts were powerless, and when experts fail, people turn to extremism. As the bells of Europe stopped ringing, because there were no bell ringers left alive, a new sound filled the air. The sound of whips. Across Germany and the Low Countries, thousands of men joined the flagellant movement. They believed that the plague was God's whip, and the only way to stop it was to whip themselves first. They marched from town to town, stripped to the waist, singing dark hymns and lashing their backs with iron-tipped cords until the ground turned red. They were a viral sensation. Thousands flocked to see them. But the flagellants brought something darker than blood, the search for a scapegoat. If the plague wasn't just bad air, then someone must be doing it on purpose. A terrifying conspiracy theory spread through the Rhine Valley. The Jews are poisoning the wells. It was a lie, of course. Jewish communities were dying from the plague at the exact same rate as Christians. But fear doesn't care about logic. In the city of Strasbourg, 2,000 Jewish people were dragged to the town square and burned alive. Similar massacres happened in over 300 cities. History shows us that when a society faces a threat it can't understand, it often invents a villain to hate. By 1350, the plague had moved into the rural heartland. 90% of Europeans lived in small villages. In these tight-knit communities, the Black Death didn't just kill people. It killed the future. Entire villages, thousands of them, were simply wiped off the map. Modern archaeologists still find them today, lost villages, where the foundations of houses sit under the grass, frozen in time. Imagine a farmer surviving the fever only to walk outside and find his entire village silent. The priest is dead, the blacksmith is dead, the lord of the manor is dead. The wheat is rotting in the fields because there is no one to harvest it. The sheep are wandering into the woods, hunted by wolves that have grown fat on human corpses. The social hierarchy that had lasted for 1,000 years, the feudal system, was dissolving. And in that chaos, the survivors found something they never had before: leverage. Before the plague, a peasant was basically a slave. But after 1351, everything changed. There were so few workers left that the surviving peasants realized they were suddenly very, very valuable. If a lord wouldn't pay them higher wages, they would just walk to the next village and find a lord who would. For the first time in history, the little guy had the power to negotiate. This was the birth of the middle class. The wealth of Europe was no longer concentrated in the hands of a few. It began to spread, people started eating better. They started wearing better clothes. The Black Death was a tragedy, yes. But it was also a great reset. It cleared the ground for the Renaissance. It forced humanity to invent machines to replace the missing labor. It sparked a curiosity about the world that eventually led to the scientific revolution. Out of the ash of 50 million bodies, the modern world began to grow. Is the Black Death over? Scientifically, no, Yersinia Pestis still exists. It lives in squirrels in California and marmots in Mongolia. We still have a few hundred cases every year, but the real legacy isn't in the dirt. It's in you. Geneticists have found that the survivors of the Black Death had specific immune system genes that helped them fight off the bacteria. If you are of European or West Asian descent, there is a high chance you are the descendant of a survivor. You carry the shield created by the greatest catastrophe in history. But there's a warning here too. The Black Death proved that our power as a civilization is an illusion. We think we are masters of the world because of our trade, our technology, and our cities, but those are the very things that the plague used against us. In 1347, it took months to cross the world. Today, it takes hours. The question isn't if another great leveler will come. The question is, have we learned enough from 1348 to survive it? The Black Death showed us that power isn't just about kings and gold. True power lies in the invisible forces of nature and our ability to adapt when everything falls apart. Humanity didn't just survive the plague. We were rebuilt by it. I'm Roni. You've been watching History and Power Explained. If this story gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe. We're going deeper into the moments that broke the world and the people who put it back together. I'll see you in the next era.